We got a really interesting report earlier today about the salary cap going up, and for the Las Vegas Raiders, this obviously is a huge positive. Plus, was Pete Carroll actually at the UNLV campus watching both Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward throwing the football out there? There's a trending story on Twitter that I kind of want to talk about. But first and foremost, let's just talk a little bit about the salary cap. Plus, there's a guy that's relative to the salary cap with the Las Vegas Raiders that could actually be released. But let's talk about the salary cap first and foremost, right? So, of course, every year the salary cap goes up a little bit. And this year, we got a huge bump in the salary cap. Last year, it was a pretty big bump as well. And once again, for the second straight year, it was another large bump. The NFL informed teams today that the 2025 salary cap will be roughly $277.5 to $281 million, right? So that's essentially what the salary cap is going to be. Now, there's already been predictions and those type of things, right? And a lot of the cap numbers that are out there are already based off of some of these predictions. But this basically puts it into context, the exact number that the Raiders will have, right? Or at least it'll give you a range of about $5 million, or somewhere in between that, I should say. But what this means is the Raiders now have roughly $95 million in cap space, which is the second most in the NFL. And we've talked about this so many different times already, right? The Raiders cap space this year, $95 million, looks great. You do have a lot of pending free agents, which we've already talked about multiple times, but I'll just show you guys the list. There's multiple pending free agents for the Las Vegas Raiders, right? And there's multiple guys that are starting caliber players specifically. So the Raiders will have to figure it out, but I think this is a positive if you really think about it, right? Because Pete Carroll, John Spytek, they weren't 100% in love with what the Raiders had last season. It's a completely different team going into next season, depending on what they do, right? Depending on which guys they bring back and which guys they don't, right? If you think about it, Trayvon Merrick is going to get $20 million. And if John Spytek feels like Trayvon Merrick isn't worth $20 million, he doesn't have to bring him back. He can let this guy walk, and there's no hit for him or for the Raiders to just kind of let him walk. You do get a comp pick, of course. I think it'd be a 4th-round pick next year. But you can essentially decide that Trayvon Merrick's not for this scheme and system. You can decide Malcolm Koonce is too expensive. We don't want to give him $20 million. You can even decide that guys like Robert Spillane and John Jenkins, maybe we don't want these guys back. My point in saying that is the Raiders have a lot of flexibility within their cap space. And now that we know the number is going to be $95 million, now that we know which guys are free agents and a little bit more in terms of the value in the market that these guys have. Like Trayvon Merrick is considered the best safety free agent available. Some people rank him as a top 5 safety in the NFL. I think he's just definitely somewhere in the top 7 to 10. I think he's a really good football player. But the Raiders get to really figure out what they're going to do as they go forward, and we have a hard number that these guys can kind of start to work with and start to really think about negotiating with some of these guys and potentially bringing them back, right? Now, we did get some other interesting information, right? It was a report by The Athletics to Sean Reed. He's basically putting it out there that there's a really good chance that Gardner Minshew is going to end up being released. The Las Vegas Raiders are not going to bring him back, or I think the words he used were they're unlikely to bring him back, right? And it's an interesting decision that John Spytek will have to make with Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew did not have success with the Raiders this past season, and there's no other way to look at it other than saying he just wasn't good for the Raiders, right? There's no questions asked. He sucked, right? But so did all the other quarterbacks for the Raiders, and truth be told, our quarterback situation is kind of bad right now, right? The Raiders are going to have to figure out what they're going to do as we kind of go forward, but at the moment, generally speaking, the quarterback situation is pretty poor if you're the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, of course, if you release Gardner Minshew, you will take a dead cap hit this year, but you'll save a little bit of money as well. Based off of what it looks like right now, if you were to release him, just straight up release him, you save about $1.5 million according to this. However, if you cut him post June 1st, you're going to save a lot more money, right? It's a lot higher. You'll save about $5 million this year. The difference between cutting a guy today versus post June 1st is that post June 1st, the cap essentially gets cut into 2 different years, right? I should say the dead money specifically. Instead of incurring, let's say, $10 million all this year, a post June 1st cut, you can basically say we're going to incur $5 million this year and $5 million next year. You can just kind of spread it out a little bit differently. But if the Raiders release Gardner Minshew, they do save a little bit of cap space over the next season and a half. But I will say one of the things with Gardner Minshew that I think the Raiders are going to have to really decide is You know, was Gardner Minshew a bad quarterback because of Wilkins, or is he just a bad quarterback altogether, right? And that's something John Spytek and Pete Carroll are going to have to decide. I think there is a chance that he ends up getting cut, but I think there's also a chance that, you know, Pete Carroll is going to say Gardner Minshew might be the best backup option we have. He might be the best worst case scenario at the quarterback position, right? I think there's a real chance that John Spytek and Pete Carroll are going to say, hey, if Gardner Minshew was, you know, he had a Pro Bowl caliber season with Shane Steichen the year before he came to the Raiders. If Gardner Minshew looked as good as he ultimately did at that point, if he almost took that team to the playoffs, and the only difference was he came to the Raiders and had arguably the worst offensive coordinator in the NFL, maybe we can have a little bit more success with Minshew. Maybe this guy will be a little bit better with Chip Kelly. To me, it's an interesting decision on if the Raiders do end up moving off of him. That is what it looks like right now, according to the reports. You know, never overlook the fact that Minshew was better with Shane Steichen before he went to Luke Getsy. Luke Getsy's already the worst play caller in the NFL, at least last year. And then don't overlook the fact that Jimmy G can go, you know, to a Super Bowl with Kyle Shanahan and then be the worst coach in the NFL, or worst quarterback in the NFL, Josh McDaniels. Jared Goff is 0-17 without Sean McVay and Ben Johnson as his offensive coordinator. Right? He's 0-17. That's two different coaches that coached him. 0-17, never won a game without those two guys. Your play caller matters. Your coordinator matters. I think is one of the big differences between the really, really good teams and the average teams, right? It's really that play caller. You know, and I wouldn't be super upset if the Raiders cut Gardner Minshew. I just think at this point, you've already paid him. You're not going to save a ton of money. What's the difference of just keeping him at this point, right? But let's go ahead and get into the next thing I want to talk about here. Remy Legault on Twitter put this out there saying that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are training at the UNLV while presumably Pete Carroll isn't in attendance watching. I'm going to let you guys listen to this video.
Bro, that's what I'm about in life. You see Pete over there watching us? Yeah, he want me, he don't want you. Hey.
So there you have it, right? You got who I think is Cam Ward saying, you know, look over there. It's Pete Carroll essentially watching. You know, I don't think this video is actually true. I think this is definitely something that's just kind of being put out there to be put out there. I don't think this is true at all, but it is trending on social media, right? And Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward are actually working out together, and they are, of course, in Vegas. And regardless of how you look at it, you know, they're still out there. They're working. They're putting the effort in. They're getting better. And I'm going to just show you guys a little bit more from the training that they were actually doing.
That's all you threw. That's why you got a 70% completion rate. All you do is this, LeJohn, double screen. What you do with touchdown? What you do with Restrepo? I ain't throwing no bubble screens. Put that on something. I can find a highlight clip. Oh, of course I do like 4. You lived and died. No, I did it. Yes, you did. Behind the back. Understand behind the back. Some Cam Ward shit. Consistency. That's what he lacks. I ain't had a bad rip yet. You lying. I had a bad ball, I had a bad rip. Come on! Come on, man, get the snap. Come on. Sit go. Smooth, rotate. Going north. Going north. You got to go north? Okay. Do I? You see, that's the golden arm right there. Yeah, it's too high. He can handle that shit. You missed that golden arm award. I can't get you. You missed that golden arm award. It's next year too. Who? Me and you in the Super Bowl. Hey, I know your weaknesses. We gonna have that thing turned up. I know your weaknesses. I know your weaknesses. I know your. All I gotta do is call RJ Stone. Who's that? My old teammate Wazoo popped your ass. That's all you threw. That's why you got a 70% completion rate. All you do is this, LeJohn, double screen. What you do with touchdown? What you do with Restrepo? I ain't throwing no bubble screens. Put that on something. Come on, man. You know you ain't first. We thought we're number 1. You were number 2. You're not gonna be the first pick. Who said anything about that? And I know you're not going. Hey, why them boys capping said you going to number 6? We both know that ain't true. That was sick, gang. Man, what is they doing? I stopped buying TVs. What is they doing, man? What's wrong with these people? Be quick. Those screens every game. You average about 15 screens a game. That's what's crazy, bro. I'll do what my team needs to win. If we got those screens, those screens. So why you ain't doing it in the bowl game? Huh? You didn't do what your team needs to win bowl games. You didn't either. You didn't do what your team needs. You didn't either. So I guess we both.
So there you guys have it, right? You got Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders kind of going back and forth, having fun out there. Some people have overanalyzed some of those passes right there that they're essentially throwing. Some people are like, hey, one quarterback has a much better arm than the other. Essentially taking shots at Shedeur Sanders. I'll be the first to tell you guys, you know, the Raiders obviously need a quarterback. And if John Spytek thinks that Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, you know, assuming they're available at pick 6, are worthy of that pick, I'd be 100% on board with those guys. Now, I'm not 100% sold on Shedeur Sanders specifically. And truth be told, I probably am not sold on any of the quarterbacks coming out of this class minus Cam Ward. He's the only quarterback that I really, really like. But if John Spytek felt that, hey, Chip Kelly and Shedeur can get it done, or if Chip Kelly and Jackson Dart can get it done, I'd be 100% on board with either of those guys, essentially, right? And there's some other wild card quarterbacks that are kind of coming out in this class, right? Quinn Ewers has obviously decided to come out, so he's technically available, and I believe NFL.com had him ranked as like the 4th quarterback in this class. And then, of course, there's guys like Jalen Milroe, who a lot of people really, really like. You got guys like Will Howard, who obviously Chip Kelly worked with this past season, and of course Kyle McCord, who's Ohio State the year before, and most recently with Syracuse. So there's definitely some interesting quarterbacks that are obviously coming out this year. And it'll be interesting to see if the Raiders end up drafting any of these quarterbacks. If it's not pick 6, you know, don't be 100% shocked if the Raiders do take a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round, right? I think there's still some intriguing options. Obviously, I think right now, Cam Ward's definitely going to be the number 1 overall pick. And then from there, it'll be interesting to see which other quarterback kind of gets drafted. But I would be 100% confident that John Spytek, Pete Carroll will get the right quarterback as we kind of go into this next season. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get any quarterback altogether, and we just roll forward with Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew going into this next season. I would not be shocked if that's the route the Raiders ultimately choose. I think John Spytek does look at this as, you know, like the long term. You know, you got to be able to not only have a good, solid foundation that can support a quarterback, but you also got to be realistic. Next year's quarterback class is a lot better, right? There's like 4 quarterbacks that are going to be first-round caliber quarterbacks. This year is not as good. But I'll be excited regardless of what the Raiders end up doing. I think, you know, for the Raiders to have actual success and win Super Bowls, you got to have a good head coach. You got to have a good general manager. It starts right there. And then you got to have good coordinators. And the Raiders have pretty much all of that right now, right? Spytek is apparently the best general manager, at least candidate at that time. He's the one guy that a lot of teams were really high on. So the fact that the Raiders were able to land him, to me, was something that kind of excited me. And we'll see some of the moves he kind of makes over the next couple of weeks. We signed a wide receiver yesterday in Kyle Phillips. If you guys don't know this, Phillips was in the past with Chip Kelly, had a lot of success at UCLA with Chip Kelly. So he's a guy that knows the scheme and system. It will be interesting to see if this is just a practice squad player or if this guy actually makes the roster. Of course, we know the Raiders' wide receiving room, at least coming into last year, was absolutely loaded. But even right now, like, you know, the targets that the Raiders are going to be able to kind of share, it's already kind of limited, right? Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer are going to demand targets. Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers are going to demand targets. And that doesn't include the fact that we don't really have an ex-wide receiver, right? Like a guy that could actually be the guy for the Raiders, right? And not the guy, that might not be the right way to say that, because technically that'll be Brock Bowers as we kind of go forward. But it'll be the X, right? The guy that's, you know, going to demand double teams when it comes to the red zone. It's the guy that's going to pull those safeties because he'll out-jump guys. So it's a true X-wide receiver. So there's not a whole lot of targets to kind of go around. But they did bring in Kyle Phillips. It will be interesting to see what type of role he plays with the Raiders. And then finally, I want to just kind of wrap this up. And, you know, there's guys around the NFL right now that are 100% expected to be moved off of the team that they're ultimately with. Right? There's superstars out there right now that will be released within the next couple of weeks. And Joey Bosa is one of those guys that's expected to be released. And it's kind of interesting, you know, not saying Joey Bosa specifically, but, you know, if the Raiders were to go all in this season, wouldn't it make a lot of sense to bring in a guy like Joey Bosa, right? Wouldn't it make sense to bring in these guys that, you know, maybe they're aging or they're kind of getting up there and these teams out there might look to move off of them? Wouldn't it make sense for the Raiders to say, let's go out and bring that guy in and let's kind of go all in and try to win this Super Bowl, right? Joey Bosa is obviously one example of that. And truth be told, you know, Joey Bosa, when he hits that free agent market, he's going to get maybe like $4 or $5 million per year more than what Malcolm Koonce would get. Would you guys say that Malcolm Koonce or would you say Joey Bosa is an upgrade over Malcolm Koonce? Would you guys actually put that out there and say that? I think it's at this point, I think it's true. I think Joey Bosa is better than Malcolm Koonce at this point. Now, could Koonce be better in 2 years? I think yes, considering that Joey Bosa is also kind of on the decline. But Bosa's still a good football player. And I think for the Raiders, you know, you just really got to think about the strategy you're going to have as you kind of go forward. Right? You can get Joey Bosa. Khalil Mack is also kind of available. At least that's kind of what some of the reports have stated. There's guys like Trent Williams, who I know the 49ers haven't moved off of him or released him, but there's reports that he's one of those guys that's going to be cut or traded. He's a guy that could ultimately end up being moved. And there's other examples of these veteran type of players around the NFL. Zach Martin's another example of that, right? If you're the Las Vegas Raiders, do you potentially look to add one of these veterans and potentially bring them in, right? Because when I was reading this article that Joey Bosa is likely to be cut, there are other guys that were kind of in this article as well that were mentioned of guys that could ultimately end up being cut, right? And it just gets you thinking, what is the Raiders' plan actually going to be? I think once we figure out that quarterback, I think we're going to know right away what the plan actually is, right? If you go down the route of, let's take Shedeur, let's take Jackson Dart, let's take Cam Ward with the 6th overall pick. If you go down that route right there where you take that quarterback, you know that they're going to kind of stay on the conservative side and they're looking long-term, right? They're not going all in short-term. And keep in mind, Pete Carroll's, he's 70 whatever years old, right? He's not going to be here forever. Pete Carroll has a 4-year contract essentially, right? It's 3 years, and then the 4th year, I think, is a team option. Pete Carroll's probably not going to be here past 3 or 4 years. So if Pete Carroll wants to win another Super Bowl, he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. A rookie quarterback's not going to win you a Super Bowl in the next 3 to 4 years. Most likely that's not happening, right? So if you want to win a Super Bowl, you got to be aggressive, right? Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, the Buccaneers, the Broncos, they got aggressive with it, right? So maybe it's Matthew Stafford, maybe it's Aaron Rodgers, and again, we're gonna find that out here probably within the next couple of weeks, right? We're gonna actually start to hear reports. The Raiders are considering this, or this quarterback is considering or visiting here or there, and I'm excited for it, man. It's honestly the best time of the year, which is the off season, because this is when your team actually gets better. When week 1 begins, it's just football from that point, and your team is what it is come preseason. It doesn't change at that point. But in the offseason is when your team gets better. It's when your team actually, really takes it to that next level. I'll tell you guys a quick story before I end the video here. When I was at the Hula Bowl and, we were doing testing, right? I was helping with the testing. There were some guys that were there from the NFL, and some of those guys, one of them was former Raider wide receiver Rod Streeter, who's currently a scout with the Eagles. I was talking to some of these guys, and it wasn't Streeter that told me this specifically. It was a different guy that worked for a different team. But this guy told me how important the offseason is. It's called the offseason for fans, but for the team, this is called the team building season, right? This is when teams actually get better. This is by far the most important part of the season, in terms of actually getting better. And I never really thought about it in that aspect. Of course, I always knew, you get better via free agency and draft, but it's so much more that goes into it, right? Because there's guys that are going to get released. There's guys that are going to get cut. Like, there's guys like legitly that aren't going to make, maybe they're rookies last year. They're going to get released here soon, right? We're going to have in April, we're going to have essentially like, before the actual draft, we'll have like some sort of mini camp. After the draft, they'll have like OTAs, right? So, there's just a lot that's going to happen over the next couple of weeks to months, and I'm excited to see the direction that the Raiders kind of go. And I'm really excited to see what type of draft John Spytek has, because you can pretty much tell right away if a general manager is good or not based off of how they draft, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and let me know what you guys think about this team and some of what we talked about, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.